guys, so I wanted to make a quick video analysing the chord progression from Someday My Prince Will Come. Largely because I think it's a very beautiful song and the chord progression is quite clever and very interesting. It's in the key of B flat and it has an A-B-A-C form with standard 8-bar sections. So now let's go through the chord progression and analyse it. Now remember that the chord progression is in the key of B flat, so my goal here is to try and remain in the key of B flat as much as I can. So we start on a B flat major 7, which is our one chord, the tonic chord, and we move to a D7. Now this is very interesting because this is actually a secondary dominant tonicizing the 6th chord, a G minor 7. So it's a 5 of 6. However, instead of playing the 6, we median note substitute the 6 by playing it a third lower, and so we get E flat major 7. Notice that E flat major 7 and G minor 7 share 3 out of 4 notes. That's what makes them plausible substitutions. They share 3/4 of their notes. So already you can see this is quite an interesting chord progression. We started on the one chord and straight away moved into a secondary dominant, but instead of resolving that secondary dominant to the expected chord, we substituted that chord. And notice also that the D7 is not a regular D7, it's a D7 sharp 5. Now this doesn't really affect the function of the chord or how we analyse this chord progression. The 5th isn't a particularly important note in a chord, and so we can alter it by flattening it or sharpening it. Next we have a G7 going to a C minor 7. So the G7 is just a secondary dominant, a 5 of 2, leading us to the 2 chord. And notice that we've sharpened the 5th again to an E flat. Then we have another G7 sharp 5 going to another C minor 7, so we'd analyse this the same way as a 5 of 2 secondary dominant going to the 2. And then we have an F7, which is our 5 chord. But instead of the 5 chord resolving back to the 1 chord, as you would expect, when we move to section B, we actually go to the 3 chord, which is actually a median note substitute of the 1 chord, and so it still functions as a tonic chord, and so it still sounds pretty good. But from the 3 chord, we play a C sharp diminished 7, going to a C minor 7, going to an F7. So as I've already said, the D minor 7 is the 3 chord or a 1 substitute. The C sharp diminished chord can either be treated as just an unimportant passing chord that we're using as a kind of approach chord to get us to the C minor 7, just to get a bit of, a chromatically descending bass line, which always sounds nice. Or you could treat it as a secondary dominant tonicizing the F7. But before we get an F7, we put in a quick little passing chord of the 2 to get a little 2-5. And again, this sounds particularly nice because we've got that descending chromatic bass line. And then those same 4 chords repeat. Then we get to the second section A, which we would analyse the exact same way as our first section A. And finally we get to section C. So this starts off like section A with the B flat major, our 1 chord, going to our 5 of 6 secondary dominant, but then to our 6 median note substitute of the 4, the E flat major 7, but then we find an E diminished chord. Now this is a chord substitution for an E flat 7, which is the 4 dominant borrowed from the Dorian mode. And again, it works well because it creates a nice ascending chromatic line, all the way up to the B flat major 7 on F, which is just an inversion. So chromatic movements, whether it's down or up, sound really nice and really smooth because they have smooth voice leading generally, and because they are very structured. They're moving by step, which is sort of creates a pattern which our ear gets used to, and it just sounds really nice and structured. So then after that substitution of a borrowed 4 dominant chord, we play the tonic chord, the 1 chord again, a B flat major 7, just in the second inversion with the F down the bottom. And so you see that 4 dominant substitute going to the 1 creates a plagal cadence. Then we play a G7, which is a 5 of 2 secondary dominant, taking us into a 2-5 as a little turnaround, getting us back to the 1 chord at the beginning of the A section for the next go round. So this whole chord progression is all in the key of B flat, but with a lot of interesting substitutions, secondary dominants, and borrowed chords. So I hope that made sense to you guys, but if it didn't, I do have separate videos on chord substitutions, secondary dominants, and borrowed chords, which you can watch if you're interested. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. See ya!